All right, so let's go ahead and actually create a database, create a schema, insert some data into it, and run some queries on that database. So I'm going to cd in desktop, pop a, let's go to CP, just challenges, pop a challenges. I'm going to make a directory called intro to SQL. I'm going to cd into intro to SQL, and I'm going to open that up into a new VS Code window. All right. So I'm in my terminal. Let's zoom in, I guess, a little bit more and run some terminal commands to get into our database. So I'm going to, if I want to see all the databases I have on my local machine, I can type PSQL. I think is a list. Yep. So I just typed in PSQL, stands for Postgres, and I went into my default user computer's name, TA-preet, and I just did \L, which lists all the databases I have on my local machine. There's a lot that I have. There we go. There's a bunch of them. All right. In order to get out of this TA-preet, I can do \Q, and it took me back to the bash terminal. All right. So if I want to create a database, say I want to create an application that stores all of Code Platoon's attendance or something like that, and I needed to create a database called Code Platoon. In order to do that, I can run in my bash, I can run create DB, that stands for create database, and I'm going to call this database Code Platoon. It says create DB error, database creation failed, error. All right. So I want to delete that database. So I'm going to do drop DB, which drops the database, essentially deletes it. So I'm going to do drop DB, drop DB, and nothing happened, which is always good. All right. So now I can go ahead and create that database again. Nothing happened, which is usually a good sign if I didn't get any errors or anything like that. Now I want to enter the Postgres or the SQL command line. So I can run PSQL followed by the name of the database. So Code Platoon. And now I'm in the Postgres command line. I'm in the Code Platoon database right here. And in here, I can do a couple of things. I can check to see if there's any, I can check my database schema, what tables I have in my database by doing \D and pressing enter. And it said did not find any relations because I just created the database, but I didn't create any data like tables or anything like that. So, and I can, yeah, so didn't find any relation. All right, so I'm going to exit out of my Code Platoon database by doing \Q. That exits out of the SQL terminal. So here I'm going to actually create a file called schema.sql. We're not dealing with JavaScript files. We're not dealing with Python files or CSV files. We're dealing with SQL files, and the file type is SQL. So schema.sql. And you can see I just created a schema file or schema SQL file. And if you downloaded the right VS Code extensions, it has this little, what looks like a server almost, or a database. If I open that up, here is my SQL file. Questions up until this point? If your create DB didn't work, or if your PSQL didn't work, don't worry about it. We'll debug that later. So one thing that's nice about SQL, the actual language, the structured query language, is that it's if you've written any part of it wrong, it will fail. It's not like Python where it'll still execute, but you might get a different answer, or like JavaScript, same thing. If any part of the language, the query is wrong, it will fail. Like it won't execute. The drawback is that the errors that you get in SQL aren't very helpful. Like it'll point you to one line and you look on that line and you're like, what the hell? It's just like a random line they like SQL points you to, is like where the error is occurring, which doesn't make any sense. That's one negative part about it. But what is good about it is that it either works or it doesn't work, and it's very structured. So let's go ahead and create a table. What kind of table would we have to create if we created like a code Platoon application? What would we need to store?
Students.
Students, yes. So I'm going to create a students table. So I'm going to do create table. So I'm creating a table. It's very specific. I'm going to call it students, and it needs to be camel case and plural because I'm going to be storing a bunch of students there, followed by open parentheses. I'm going to click enter. And most people forget, after every query, SQL query, it needs to have a semicolon at the end of it. So now, what columns, headers or columns do I need to have in here? Just to keep it super simple.
ID.
First name, last name.
All right, I heard first name, last name, and I also heard ID. So I'm new to SQL, I'm new to Postgres. Let's go ahead and let's just look up some stuff. How to create SQL Postgres table. I'm going to do Postgres tutorial because postgrestutorial.com is actually a great resource. So here kind of give some examples. So here's an example, create a table example. So I'm going to create an accounts table that has a user ID as a primary key. All right. This is not necessarily best. Oh, yeah, I guess. All right. So I heard an ID, first name and last name. So I'm going to do an ID, and I'm going to use this ID as the primary key. So I'm going to use this keyword serial and primary key. The serial keyword essentially says anytime I create a new record, to increment this value by one. That's why 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's where each ID is unique. And this also just means that this field is the primary key. And I heard first name. First name. All right, I've got first name. How to add varchar to SQL, or I'll just do PostgreSQL. I'm just going to look at this. So it's got characters varying, varchar n. I'm just looking. So it looks like it tells us how we can insert. Look on the side, it says fundamentals. Is this what I want right here? Okay, look, it looks like varchar 10. All right. So first name, I'm going to do varchar. I'm just going to do 255. And I'm also going to add a not null constraint to this. So not null means when I add values or add records to the students, it needs to have a value for the first name. And I need to have a comma. It's and a comma at the very end. I'm going to do the same thing for last name. So ID serial, because this is means that every when a new record was created, it's going to increment from the last ID, and I'm going to make this the primary key of the students table. I could make another value the primary key if I wanted to, but that's not best practice. Always ID should be the primary key. And I'm adding a first name that has a variable character. So that has a max length of 255 characters long. And I'm adding a not null constraint to it. Means I can't enter a first name without a value in it. Questions about the not null or about this create table?
Does the last entry in the table need a comma, or do we leave off the comma, or does it not matter?
I don't think it matters, but I'm just gonna not add it because usually you want to add it if there's another value, another column. So I'm not going to include that comma there. All right.
Thanks.
So there's two ways I could either have created a file, or I could have PSQL'd into my code Platoon database and ran that query in here as well. So inside of the code Platoon database, I could run queries in here. But I'm going to run this file on this code Platoon database. So in order to run this schema and insert it and add it to our code Platoon database, I'm going to write PSQL, the name of the database, which is code Platoon, and an angle bracket towards the code Platoon database. I'm going to run the schema.sql file into or on the code Platoon database. So PSQL, name of the database, angle bracket towards it. I'm going to run the SQL on the schema SQL file on the code Platoon database. So when I run that, I get a little thing that says create table. That means it executed correctly and it created this students table. Now I can run and see whether or not I can make sure that this table was created by running PSQL code Platoon. So now I'm inside of the code Platoon Postgres database. I'm going to do \D to see the relational, all the tables. And here we have a schema. The name of the table is students. So it's the table name. The owner is, TA Preet, the name of the machine. And the student's ID sequence, I think that just means that this table, the ID moves in sequential order. You don't really need to know what that means. But now I can actually inspect the students table as well. I can do \D and then the name of the students table. And now I can inspect the field names, the types, etc. So I did \students, which is the name of the students table, and it gives the column name and the column type. So I've got the ID, first name, last name corresponds to the ID, first name, last name in my students table, and the type. The ID is an integer. The varchar is a varying of 255 characters long for the first name and last name. And all three of them are not null constraints. I don't necessarily know what this means. Don't have to worry about it. Something binary tree ID. Yeah. So I can quit. I'm going to clear the terminal and go back into my code Platoon. Now I want to run a query that selects all the students from the students table. Does anybody remember that query? If I wanted to select all the students from the students table.
So star.
Select star. Anything else?
Students.
Students.
From students.
From
And don't forget, you're going to need that semicolon at the end. If you don't, if I just click enter, it doesn't do anything. It's still running this query. So I need to end it by just doing that. And there, it queried the database, the students table, ID, first name, last name. It returns 0 rows because there isn't any data within the database. So maybe I want to insert some data into it. Now I could insert data into it just running a query here, insert into, but I want to use an actual file to do that. So I'm going to create a file called seed.sql. So the seed file is I'm going to run SQL queries in here to actually create values within my database. So does anybody remember how I add data to the students table?
Yeah, it should be insert into the name of the table, parentheses, and then each field that you're going to add values to.
Yep. So
And then
insert
you need-
into students. So insert into the students table, parentheses, the first name, last name. And I heard, what were you gonna say?
And then I was going to say you need the term values, parentheses, and then the values that correspond to those
All right.
fields that you named.
All right. So I'm gonna say like Adam McDonald, like so. So I'm gonna create Adam McDonald. That's one. Don't forget that semicolon. Who else can we add in here? Jordan West. These are all past students or current students. What else we got? We have Kristen. Last one. All right. So I'm inserting 5 different students into there. Now, how do I run this seed file into the Code Platoon database? Can anybody tell me how to do that? Very similar to how we ran the schema file.
Code Platoon with the little arrow.
Yep. So PSQL Code Platoon, the name of the database, angle brackets towards the Code Platoon database, followed by the seed.sql file. Now, if I run that, if I did everything correctly, it'll give me some indication that it did in fact insert data into my database. So it looks like it inserted, insert. So each one of these corresponds to each record I'm inserting into my database. So I didn't get any errors, which is good. Now let's run some queries on that. So I'm going to PSQL Code Platoon. Now I'm inside my Code Platoon database. So if I wanted to select star from students table, so select all the students from the students table, I've got 5 records of students in my students table. Great. Now, if I wanted to, let's see, what should I do? Maybe I wanted to just grab, Kristen from here. So I can do select everybody from the students table what's Kristen's ID? ID equals 4. And I get Kristen. I don't necessarily have to use ID. So select everything from the student table, maybe where first name equals Kristen. I also get that as well. If I use double double quotes, let's see what happens if I use double quotes when I'm referring to a string. It says error column Kristen does not exist. Select star from students where it's pointing me right here. But like error column Kristen doesn't exist. That doesn't make any sense. Like that error is not very helpful to me. It's because when you're writing queries, you can only use single quotes, not double quotes. I know it's not very helpful.
So Tom, on that error, it said column Kristen does not exist. Is the double quote searching for the name of the column?
I don't know. That's why, yeah, I am not sure. Does anybody know why it's?
I mean, can we try a search for double quote? What is it? First name,
So if we do,
and then maybe try that with single quote as well. I'm just curious.
why not? So if I do first name. Yeah, that might work. That's weird. So that could be it. But you don't even need the double quotes. So just when in doubt, don't use double quotes anywhere.
No, so what I meant was select star from. Well, actually, no, I don't think that makes sense now.
Yeah.
I was suggesting looking for like the title, like looking for the title of first name, but yeah, I don't think it makes sense. Disregard and thank you.
No problem.
I looked it up. So it's kind of confusing. I would totally go with what Tom said. Just don't do it unless you are in a situation where you kind of have to. But like, let's say you need to name a column select instead of some useful one. You could then say, for example, select double quoted select, and then use that as a value of a column name. But good Lord, you'd be setting yourself up for failure.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's probably not a wise choice for column naming.
Hey, Tom, I have a question too, sorry.
Yep.
My question is, why are we using these schema and seed files if we're supposed to be using the terminal? Is this just to show us that you can do it with the files, but we're going to be doing it in the terminal? Or can we cheat and just use two files and then import them to avoid using the terminal?
Yeah, so you don't necessarily have to use the terminal. We're just showing it so it's like live, so you can literally just show you SQL or running the queries live instead of writing it in the file and then executing the file to run the queries. So you can do
Okay,
either or.
so you don't need the files at all.
No, you don't need the files at all. But
Okay,
typically
awesome,
you'd want files when you're creating your schema. You don't want to create your schema in the terminal. You want a file that has your schema in there, and then you execute that file to create to create your schema.
Got it. Thank you.
So yeah, we're just running queries in here just so you can see them query the database in real time and all that. And to inspect, you can inspect your database in here to make sure it's all set up correctly. But yeah, let's just go into some more queries. So I'm going to select everything. Maybe I just want to select the ID and first, or maybe just the first name and the last name select from students. And maybe I want to select the IDs between 2 and, IDs between 2 and 4. So students where ID between 2 and 4. So I'm selecting the first name and the last name from the students where their ID is between 2 and 4, and that's inclusive. And where I'm capitalizing the select from, where, between, and you don't have to capitalize them. It's just done that way. I think you used to have to keep things capitalized, but you don't have to anymore. But I just do it so I can visually see or visually separate what's a SQL query and what is referring to a column, table. Yeah. So first name, last name. And I can make sure that that is in fact the ID. Let's just grab, I guess, first name, ID and the first name. So 2, 3, 4, Jordan, Emma, Kristen. Clear, I'm just gonna clear just so I can get some real estate, terminal real estate up here. Also, maybe I want to grab all students who have an E in their last name. So I can do select star from students where first name like, and what do I want to have has an E in their last name?
Percent sign. Well, you want to use last name if you're going to do last name, but percent sign, E percent sign.
E percent sign like that. So this is going to select all the students that I want I wanted last name. Last name that has an E in their last name. So the percent sign says, hey, there can be characters that exist before the E, and the percent sign said there's characters can exist after the E. So who should it be? Jordan, Emma, and Kristen. So it's pretty much 2 through 4 up. If I wanted just students who have the last name start with B, I can do last name like starts with a B and has character come afterwards, which is Zachary. All right.
Is that case sensitive?
I don't know. Let's try that out. I think it is. Yep, it is case sensitive. But I think does I like? So I like is if you use instead of like, you use I like. I like is case insensitive. Someone raise their hand. Oh, Michael, did you have a question?
No, I was going to ask this.
Oh, awesome. All right.
Actually, I do have a quick question. Is this it? I'm seeing a lot of like parallels to regex on this. Is that something that's used in SQL more? Like, I don't know, just the kind of like matching and you know, trying to find like certain elements of a document. Will we see regex in this at all or no?
No. So regex is not does not exist within SQL. And these are just some. Susan?
How hard is it to exclude things? Do you just use the not operator, or is that not something you could do?
No, yeah, it would just be not, does not include certain things. And you'll get, everyone's going to get plenty of practice with running SQL queries. Oh, what the hell is that? All right. So clear. Let's get into some more. So let's add another table called create table cohorts, because there's a bunch of different cohorts. So I want to create a cohorts of like Alpha Platoon, Bravo Platoon, Charlie Platoon, all the way down. So if I wanted to create a cohorts table, so create cohorts, serial, primary key, and I'm just going to say cohort name, and I'm going to have varchar, I'm just going to default to 255. So I'm altering my database now. I'm altering the schema of my database. So now I'm going to do PSQL code Platoon because I want to add this cohorts to this database. I can do it a couple of ways. I can either use this file or I can run it in here. So I just created this. See, I like to create my queries in a file and then either run the file or run them inside the terminal. And I'll kind of show you why. All right. Oh, whoops. Oh, what did I do? Looks like I messed that up. So it says relation students already exists, but now I'm going to create cohorts. So I created a table cohorts. Now I'm going to quit, clear, go back in. I'm going to inspect all the tables. So I did \D, list of relations. I've got the cohorts table and the students table. Great. And I can inspect the cohorts table by doing \D cohorts. And now I can see I've got an ID and a cohort name. And notice here, the cohort name doesn't have a not null constraint on it, which is fine. But maybe I actually wanted a not null constraint on it. So I'm going to add a not null constraint on that. And I'm going to actually run this file using just executing this file. Let's see what happens. So I already have a students table and a cohorts table, but I'm modifying this one. I'm just going to overwrite everything. It says error, relation students already exists. Relation cohorts already exists. Uh-oh. So it's trying to write a students table and a cohorts table on a database that already has a students and cohorts table. Now I can run an alter statement. Which I could easily do, or what you guys are all going to encounter when you're dropping tables, because you're going to end up dropping tables all the time. Do you want to see me alter a table, or yeah, let's actually just do this. So for here, when you inevitably run into this, you're going to have to do drop table if exists students. And then drop table if exists cohorts. So now if I run this, it dropped the table. So it deleted the students table and deleted the cohorts table, and then it recreated them. But now all my students are probably disappeared. So if I can run that, and if I do select star from students, now I don't have any students. So now I'll have to run my seed file again. So I inserted all my seed file in there. But now let's actually create some cohorts. Insert into cohorts, cohort name, values, Juliet, Platoon, Mike Platoon, and Papa Platoon. So I already ran my seed file once, it inserted everything in there, but now I'm going to run my seed file again. Let's see. With these queries in here again. If I run that, what happened? See, look, it said syntax error at or near insert. And it's like, it points at like the very first element. But if you notice what I did is I forgot to include those colons in there. Cool. But notice how many times I ran that I ran this file like 3 different times. So how many times did it create a student of the same student? I can inspect my students table. So now look, I've got a bunch of duplicates because I ran this file a bunch of times. So again, I'm gonna have to just keep things simple. I'm gonna run that schema again. So I drop the database, or I drop the table, and now I'm gonna run the seed file again. Oh, whoops. So now everything should be good. Select star from students. All right. Now I want to select star from cohorts. All right. So I've got a students table and a cohorts table with the data in it. But now, how do I relate the students table to the cohorts table? So like Adam, Kristen, and Zachary are all in Platoon. So what should I, if I wanted to modify a table to add the cohorts to a student, where should I do that? Oh, Morgan?
Join table.
Sorry? Heard a couple people.
Add the foreign key column in your students table.
Yep, I can add a foreign key to the students table. So again, I'd have to, if I wanted to make any adjustments, I'd have to drop the students table and all that stuff. But I'm going to just create another file called alter, or actually, I'm going to do this inside of the terminal. I'm going to do PSQL Platoon. I'm just going to inspect the students table. So I've got an integer first name, last name, but I'm going to want to add like a cohort ID on this and have it reference the cohorts table. But I'm going to do it by altering the students table using the terminal. So I can do, let's just Google it. How to alter table in SQL Postgres tutorial. Looks like I already looked this up. I can do alter table followed by the table name and what I actually want to alter. So for example, alter table, the name of the table. So I want to add a column. So the column type, I'm sorry, the column name followed by the column type, and then followed by any column constraints. So here I can look at, I can rename a column, I can drop a column, I can alter, I can set a default value. So here are all of them, but this is what I want to do, is this part. So I'm going to alter column or alter table. I'm going to alter table, the students table. I'm going to add a column. The name of the column is going to be cohort ID, and I want to add a foreign key to that. I want to make sure, so column name, data type is integer, because it's going to reference the ID of the cohort, and it's going to reference the cohorts or references the cohorts table. So now, so I altered the table, named students, I added a column called cohort ID. The column type is going to be an integer, and I'm referencing the cohorts table. And if I just do cohorts like that, it automatically references the cohort's ID. So now I can inspect it. Right there.
Tom, did you have to do those 3 entries on 3 different lines, or is it just basically for ease of reading?
Yeah, I just did it for ease of readability.
Okay, that's what I was thinking. I just want to make sure.
Yep. So what I did, essentially, was alter table, students. What is it? Add column cohort ID, integer references, cohorts. So this is the query I did right here. If I already knew when I writing my table, I could have just done integer references cohorts like that if I wanted to do that as well, if I didn't alter the table.
Just curious, can you make that non-null?
Yeah, I could integer references not null.
Now, with that question, if you had altered the table, can you alter a table and make that non-null? And then what happens?
It would throw an error and I'd have to set a default value.
Got it.
Yep. But so if I wanted to do that, if I design my cohort like this, or my student table right the first time, I can run that schema SQL. So it dropped the table. Oh, it says relation cohorts does not exist. So what is it trying to do right in here? Remember, the file reads from top to bottom. So it dropped the table, students, dropped this table, cohorts, and then it tried to create the students table, and it got right here and it threw an error. It said relation cohorts does not exist.
If you haven't created it yet, cohorts would have to go before tables.
So exactly. So I haven't created the cohorts table yet. So it threw an error when creating the students table right here, but then it just jumped down and created the cohorts table. So if I wanted to inspect, it only has the cohorts table now. So this is kind of where, if you're running, if you're creating relationships between your tables in the file, make sure that when you're referencing or creating foreign keys on tables, make sure whatever table that the referencing is already created. So if I moved cohorts before students and ran that, it says table students does not exist, because I actually didn't create the last time I ran it, students table threw an error, so it didn't create it. And then it dropped the table, and then it created both tables. So now, if I go to add students or add cohorts to the students table, so when I seed data, so again, say, Adam is in Poplar Platoon, Jordan was in Juliet Platoon, which would be ID of 1. Emma was in Mike Platoon, which is ID of 2. And Kristen and Zachary are in Poplar Platoon, which would be an ID of 3. So if I ran the seed file on the platoon or on the code platoon, I'd also get an error. So insert has more. It's like, all right, first name, last name, values 3. So insert has more expressions than target columns. Uh-oh, what did I do? So I'm trying to insert 3 pieces of data in here, but it doesn't know because I'm only targeting 2 here. So here I'd have to do cohort ID. Let's see what happens if I run that again. All right. So I see something that may have happened. So schema. Uh-oh, what happened? Insert or update on table students violates foreign key constraint. Students cohort ID. So cohort ID 3 right here does not present a table in cohorts. Same thing that happened when I created that schema. I have to create that data first. All right. I think we're in a good spot. So I'm just gonna do select star from students just to make sure. Okay, so I've got students with a cohort ID. And down here, if I do select everything from cohorts, I get Joliet, Platoon, Mike Platoon, Papa Platoon. So now if I wanted to, I'm just going to create a new file called queries.sql. And if I wanted to see what cohort Kristen belongs to, how do I go about doing that? What's that query look like?
So select cohort name or cohort ID from, I can't see what's on there. Select cohort ID from students.
Select cohort ID from students.
It'll give you the numbers of the cohorts.
All right, let's run that. So if I run that down here, but it doesn't know what cohort ID 3 is. So if I didn't have visibility into the database as to like what ID Papa Platoon or what cohort Kristen belongs to, how would I go about doing that?
You have to join the tables together somehow?
Yep. So this is where a little more advanced that you'll get. So I'd have to select, I'm going to select everything from students. So I selected all the students. Great. So now I'm going to select everything from the students and I'm going to join the cohorts table. So now I'm joining the cohort. So I've got all the students. Now I'm also going to join the cohorts table as well. And I'm going to join them on where the students ID, oh, sorry, students cohort ID equals the cohorts ID. So I just want to run that and see what happens. So I selected everything from the students and then I joined the cohorts table, which is this part of the table where the cohort ID equals the ID of the cohort.id. So notice how they're all kind of matched up here. So this is what it's called a join table. So now I can do a where clause, like last name equals root, what is it? And now I get what cohort Kristen belongs to. I can even only grab the cohort name from. So this is what a SQL query would look like. Select just the cohort name from the students table. I'm joining the cohorts table on, this is where you're going to actually kind of match up the students table and the cohorts table, where they're going to combine to where they equal. So the students.cohort ID equals the cohorts ID, where last name equals Rupert. This is a little more advanced. You're gonna get plenty of practice doing all this stuff. So this is what it's called, a join table. And there's multiple types of join table. There's an inner join, left join, outer join. There's a bunch of different join tables.
And Tom, if I understand correctly, the join table, it's not actually creating another table. It's just allowing you to like see those two tables with that information side by side when you do the query. Like if you were to look at the database right now, like there's not going to be a new like, okay.
Yep. So yeah, it's just creating, it's not actually creating a new table. So I still got these just cohorts table and students table, but it's querying the students table. Also, it's grabbing the cohorts table and combining them into a query that you can grab.
Thanks, Tom. That makes
Yep.
sense.
And there's more stuff to it, but this is a good stopping point. Questions?
Yeah, well, I was going to ask kind of along the same line. So it's not even writing to like short-term memory a new join table. It's literally kind of like a print type setup where it's just printing it to terminal and then aligning the IDs. So it's almost it prints a line and then it runs a little internal search queue based off of that last ID for the match, and then prints and then goes through until it prints it all to terminal.
Yep.
And there's nothing stored in short-term data for us to access on like the next command or anything like that. Okay. Thanks.
Nope. All right, I'm gonna